Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Christina Langell. With me today is our Pennsylvania editor, Kristen Smith, and we're going to be talking a little bit about energy. How you doing, Kristen?
Doing well. How are you? Ready to talk about what the people want?
Yeah. So you just covered a poll that checked in with how people are feeling about current energy choices and prices. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So Public Opinion Strategies released this poll Thursday, which is today as of recording. It was commissioned by the Commonwealth Foundation, which is a fiscally conservative policy group. And they're based in Harrisburg. They're worried about the money that the state government spends. And so through this poll, they asked about 800 registered voters, how they were feeling about energy affordability and the cost of electricity and the best ways to address that. And unsurprisingly, the majority of them, more than 2/3, said that the thing that they are most concerned about is that they just want affordable electricity. It's not really mattering where it comes from, just as long as they can afford it. We're in a time of great economic uncertainty. People have been crushed under inflation. Everything's going up. There's a lot of economic whiplash with the tariffs and then not the tariffs. So I think people, according to the survey, really just want to know that they're going to be able to pay their utility bills.
And how does the switch towards more renewable energy impact those bills on a practical level?
Depends on how you look at it. There are two schools of thought on how this will work. We are slowly transitioning to renewable energy sources, so solar, wind power, hydroelectric, things like that. But the transition that is slow, it has to be underpinned by our traditional generation sources, fossil fuels, nuclear plants. And we are at this turning point where we have so much power that we need for data centers and for the proliferation of electric cars and for people who do want to have renewable energy in their homes. We need so much power that now we're at the crux of, okay, we need to build a lot more power sources to do this. Well, let's do the renewable stuff because that's where we're trying to go in the future. But the problem is the technology is not there to support the stability of the grid. So how do we fix this? That's where the questions come in. The governor he has this whole huge thing called the Lightning Plan. And part of that is creating a statewide program that would incentivize development in renewable energy through tax credits. It would require the state to get a certain amount of its power from wind and solar by 2040. And then a lot of other things that we don't need to get into the weeds on. But essentially, it's supposed to governmentally incentivize the transition and make it faster. And their feeling is kind of like, if you build it, they will come. And the flip side of that is that people are worried, critics are worried really that transitioning is happening way too fast. And if you build it, it may be unreliable and it's going to be ratepayers who are going to be stuck footing that bill and their electricity is going to be less reliable than it was before. And stuck in the middle are all of us ratepayers who are kind of just, a lot of this stuff is really high level stuff that, for most of us, we just want to know, we turn the lights on, that it's going to be there or that we're going to have heat in the winter and AC in the summer. And we want to know that we're going to be able to pay that bill every month. So it depends on what comfort level a person has when it comes to this issue. Are you willing to have a slower transition to let the market, catch up to where we would need it to be for it to be feasible for everybody to have renewable energy at their houses? Or are we going to put the money in from the federal government and so that it will, in their minds, it will increase the development of technology because there's extra money going into it? That's the decision that lawmakers can't seem to come to an agreement on in Pennsylvania.
So when it comes to the impact of this sort of energy, it sounds like in a perfect world, people would opt for renewable energy. But in the meantime, we're kind of in a race between the ecological effects of our current energy usage and our ability to change quickly enough, right?
That's certainly a fair interpretation of where we're at. If residents are most concerned about the economics of paying for utilities, right? So then wouldn't we all want to have solar power so we don't have to pay for energy? Or wouldn't we all want to have an electric car so we don't have to pay for gas? The problem is that electric powered vehicles and solar panels are very expensive. There's a lot of startup costs involved with those. Again, the technology is not where it needs to be for the average consumer to not only feel comfortable, but to be able to afford to use those kind of resources. So what do they do in the meantime? They're like, well, just let me stick with what I have because I know at the very least I've got those bills covered. But if we were to live, let's say that the market does catch up in the next 15 to 20 years. And suddenly you could buy an electric vehicle for the price of your typical gas powered vehicle. And there's a significant charging infrastructure out in the world for it. And they have a range that makes sense for most families. And the batteries are cheaper to replace it. All of these things that make them a lot more consumer friendly. If we get to all those places, I think absolutely that, people would be like, yeah, I'll buy an electric car. Why not? Because now it makes sense for me. But at the same time, we can't get there without investment. And so I think that there's this continual, what's the word I want to use? There's this continual push and pull, right, with the ethics of a consumer that perhaps wants to not have to rely on fossil fuels if they didn't have to. And then, the reality of our situation, which is that, on a micro level, green energy is great, but it just can't fit into my life. I can't afford it right now. So this polling, it's basically showing in a lot of ways, I think it's capturing that because most people and 2/3 of the people in the poll are saying, in order to conserve energy, since we're worried about the cost, we're going to turn off our lights. We're going to unplug our appliances when we're not using them. And if we're worried about the environment, we're going to stop using plastic bags and, smaller things that they can actually achieve in their lives. And only 7% are going to get solar panels. Only 10% are going to get an electric vehicle. So there's still a willingness there to do it, but it's very cost prohibitive for the majority of people. It's just unrealistic for them. So you'd have to wonder if it were realistic, if it were something that they could afford, would those things be higher up on the list? Now, we don't know what we don't know, but I think that's what this polling is that's the interesting question that the polling brings up, because so much of this is affected by what consumers can reasonably afford. And a lot of that, of course, is affected by state and federal policy about these issues. But at the end of the day, if people can't afford to keep their lights on, they're certainly not going to be able to buy a $60,000 battery powered car. They're not going to be able to install solar panels for $40,000 on their house and then pay the loan back for 20 years or whatever it would be. So yeah, this polling it's a very interesting peek into where the consumer's mind is at. But I think it opens up a lot of more questions than it answers.
It does. It definitely, I know Center Square is covering a lot of stuff about the data centers and their energy usage. So I'll look forward to reading up on that as well, just to see how those two issues interact with each other. Well, thank you so much, Kristen. We'll keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com/Pennsylvania.